Distress in the void. Jack Reynolds adjusted his coffee cup in the zero-gravity holder and gazed out at the star-scattered darkness of the Proxima sector. At 48, he'd seen enough emergency calls to know that most of them came too late. The Earth Interstellar Rescue Corps had sent him on what seemed like a routine patrol: sweep the outer asteroid belt, check for stranded vessels, return home in 3 days. The silence of space was broken by the sharp beep of his communications array. "Emergency beacon detected," announced his ship's AI in its characteristic monotone. "Signal strength weak. Distance, 47,000 kilometers." Jack straightened in his pilot's seat, instantly alert. Emergency beacons in this sector were rare. Most smart pilots avoided the Proxima belt entirely. Too many asteroids, too much radiation, too little hope if something went wrong. "Display signal origin," he commanded. A holographic display materialized before him, showing a faint red dot pulsing weakly against the backdrop of drifting asteroids. The signal was definitely alien, he could tell by the frequency modulation pattern. Probably Verdani, based on the encryption signature his computer was struggling to decode. Jack rubbed his stubbled chin. The Verdani were former enemies, though the war had ended 20 years ago. Old habits died hard, but rescue protocols were clear: species didn't matter when someone was dying in space. "Computer, analyze beacon data. How long has it been transmitting?" "Beacon active for approximately 14 hours, 17 minutes. Signal degrading. Estimated power failure in 6 hours. 14 hours. That was a long time to be stranded in this sector. Jack's experienced hands were already plotting a course before his conscious mind made the decision. Whatever was out there needed help, and needed it fast. Set course for beacon origin. Maximum burn. His ship, the Horizon, responded with a subtle vibration as the engines engaged. The rescue craft wasn't built for speed, but she was reliable, exactly what you wanted when lives hung in the balance. As they approached the coordinates, Jack's sensors began painting a clearer picture. A Verdani vessel, sleek and angular in the alien style, drifted motionless among the asteroids. Hull breaches were visible even from a distance, and the ship's running lights were completely dark. "Life signs?" Jack asked his computer. "Scanning. 2 faint biosignatures detected. Both showing signs of severe hypothermia. Warning, life support appears to be failing. 2 survivors, barely hanging on." Jack felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every rescue, the knowledge that the next few minutes would determine whether someone lived or died. He suited up quickly, checking his emergency medical kit twice. The bulky environmental suit felt familiar after years of rescue work, like armor that had saved his life more times than he could count. The external temperature readings made him wince, -57 degrees Celsius and dropping. "Horizon, prepare medical bay for hypothermia treatment. 2 subjects, species Verdani. Acknowledged. Medical bay configured for alien physiology." As Jack approached the damaged vessel, he couldn't help but admire its construction even in its current state. Verdani ships were works of art, elegant curves and flowing lines that made human vessels look like flying toolboxes by comparison. This one had been beautiful once. Now it was a tomb waiting to happen. Jack activated his suit's external lights and began searching for an entry point. The main airlock was twisted and sealed shut, but he found what looked like an emergency access port near the stern. His cutting tools made quick work of the frozen seal. The moment he breached the hull, Jack felt the difference. The air inside was so cold it was almost solid, and ice crystals danced in the beam of his helmet lights. His suit's external sensors painted a grim picture: life support had been failing for hours. And somewhere in this frozen tomb, 2 beings were still clinging to life. The discovery. Jack pushed through the frozen corridor of the alien vessel, his helmet lights cutting through the crystallized air. Ice covered every surface like a deadly art installation, and his breath caught when he saw the fractal patterns covering the viewports, beautiful and terrifying evidence of how close to absolute zero the ship had fallen. Hello, he called out, his voice echoing through the comm system. Earth Rescue Corps. Can anyone hear me? A weak sound reached his ears, barely more than a whisper, but definitely a voice. Jack followed the sound toward what appeared to be the ship's main cabin, his heavy boots clanging against the metal deck plating. What he found stopped him cold. Huddled in the center of the cabin sat a figure that could only be Verdani, tall, graceful, with the characteristic emerald skin that had faded to a sickly pale green. She was wrapped in what looked like ceremonial armor, now serving as an inadequate shield against the killing cold. Her pointed ears were tinged blue with hypothermia, and her breath came in ragged puffs that instantly crystallized in the frigid air. But it was what she held in her arms that truly shocked him. A dragon. An actual, real-life dragon, no bigger than a house cat, with crimson scales and delicate wings folded against its trembling body. The creature's eyes, normally bright and intelligent in the stories, were dim and fading. Please, the Verdani woman managed through chattering teeth, looking up at Jack with desperate eyes. Save him first. He's just a baby. Jack had been trained for many scenarios, but rescuing mythological creatures wasn't one of them. Still, a life was a life, and he could see both beings were minutes away from cellular crystallization. I'm Jack Reynolds, Earth Rescue Corps, he said, kneeling beside them and pulling emergency thermal blankets from his pack. We're going to get you both out of here. He wrapped the dragon first, as the woman had requested. The little creature was so cold it barely responded to his touch, but he could feel a faint warmth still radiating from its core, some internal fire that hadn't quite died out yet. What's his name? Jack asked, trying to keep the woman conscious as he wrapped a second blanket around her shoulders. Ember, she whispered. I'm Zara. We've been here so long. 14 hours, Jack confirmed, carefully lifting the wrapped dragon. Your beacon saved your lives. Can you stand? Zara tried to rise but collapsed back immediately, her legs unable to support her. Jack made a quick decision, dragon first, then come back for the woman. Time was running out for both of them. I'll be right back, he promised, meeting her frightened eyes. 60 seconds, I swear. Jack carried Ember through the frozen corridor as quickly as he dared, the dragon's shallow breathing visible even through the thermal blanket. His ship's airlock had never looked so welcoming. The moment they crossed the threshold and the outer door sealed, Jack felt the blessed rush of warm, pressurized air. Medical bay, now, he muttered to himself, rushing through the ship's cramped corridors. The Horizon's medical facility was designed for human physiology, but it would have to do. Jack placed Ember on the warming platform and watched the dragon's vital signs slowly stabilize on the monitors. The little creature's eyes fluttered open for a moment, meeting Jack's gaze with what looked almost like gratitude before closing again. Hang in there, little guy, Jack whispered, then turned and ran back toward the airlock. Zara was unconscious when he returned, her body's systems shutting down to preserve core functions. Jack scooped her up as gently as possible, noting how light she felt despite her height. Verdani physiology, he'd studied it during the war, but this was his first time seeing hypothermia in their species. The trip back to his ship felt like hours but took less than 3 minutes. By the time Jack had Zara on a second warming platform in the medical bay, her skin was already beginning to show more color. The ship's computer had adjusted atmospheric composition and temperature for Verdani biology, and the life support systems hummed with efficient purpose. Jack sat heavily in the medical bay's single chair, finally allowing himself to breathe. 2 lives saved. In 23 years of rescue work, it never got old. He looked from Zara to the small dragon named Ember, both now stable and warming under the medical bay's careful attention. The little creature was already showing signs of improvement, its scales beginning to regain their crimson luster. Computer, Jack said quietly, set course for the nearest medical station. And send a message to Verdani Cultural Ministry, we've got 2 of their people safe. As the Horizon began its journey away from the asteroid belt, Jack couldn't help but smile. He'd come out here expecting a routine patrol, maybe a broken-down cargo hauler if he was lucky. Instead, he'd found something much more precious, proof that compassion could bridge any gap between species, even in the coldest reaches of space. Awakening. Zara's first conscious thought was warmth. Blessed, wonderful warmth seeping into her bones and chasing away the crystal-cold grip of death. Her second thought was panic. Ember, she gasped, sitting up too quickly and immediately regretting it as the medical bay spun around her. Easy there, came a gentle voice with a distinctly human accent. Your little friend is right here. Zara turned her head to see the dragon curled up on a small warming platform beside her, his scales now glowing with healthy crimson light. Ember raised his tiny head at the sound of her voice and let out a soft chirp that was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. The human, Jack, she remembered, sat in a chair beside both platforms, looking tired but pleased. His environmental suit had been replaced with a simple jumpsuit bearing the Earth Rescue Corps insignia, and Zara could see the care lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent saving lives in dangerous places. How long was I unconscious? She asked, her voice still hoarse from the cold. About 6 hours, Jack replied, checking readings on a handheld medical scanner. Your core temperature was down to 31 degrees when I found you. Another hour and... He didn't finish the sentence, but Zara understood. She looked around the cramped medical bay, taking in the efficient human design. Everything was functional, practical, so different from Verdani aesthetics, but undeniably effective. The walls were lined with medical equipment she didn't recognize, though their purpose was clear enough. My ship? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Complete loss, Jack said softly. The hull was compromised in too many places, and the reactor was beyond repair. I'm sorry. Zara nodded, surprised to find she wasn't more upset. The Sia Fidias had been her home for 3 years, but it was just metal and circuitry. What mattered was sitting right beside her, purring contentedly as warmth returned to his small body. The artifacts I was carrying, she began. Already contacted your cultural ministry, Jack interrupted. They're insured, and frankly, they seemed more relieved that you were alive than worried about the cargo. Something about you being irreplaceable, and the artifacts being merely rare. That sounded like Ambassador Valzac, Zara thought with a weak smile. The old diplomat had always valued people over objects, which made him unusual among government officials of any species. Ember stretched his wings experimentally, and Zara was relieved to see no damage from their ordeal. Dragons were supposed to be hardy creatures, but Ember had always been small for his age, and the cold had affected him more severely than it should have. He's beautiful, Jack said quietly, watching the dragon with obvious fascination. I've never seen one in person before. Dragons are supposed to be extinct, according to our xenobiology texts. Not extinct, Zara corrected, reaching out to stroke Ember's head. Just rare. There are maybe 200 left in the entire galaxy, most of them on the protected reserves of Kaldar Prime. Ember was rescued from poachers when he was just hatched. Poachers? Jack's expression darkened. Dragon scales are worth a fortune on the black market. Fire-resistant properties make them valuable for industrial applications. Zara's voice carried old anger. I found him hidden under his mother's body after they'd stripped her clean. He was no bigger than my thumb. Jack was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So you saved him, and now I've saved both of you. Full circle. More than you know, Zara said, meeting his eyes. Verdani and humans aren't exactly known for helping each other. 20 years of peace doesn't erase 2 centuries of war overnight. Maybe not, Jack agreed, but it's a start. Besides, space doesn't care about politics. Out here, we're all just trying to survive. Ember chose that moment to demonstrate his recovery by producing a small puff of flame, not much, barely enough to light a candle, but proof that his internal fire was rekindling. The tiny flame danced in the medical bay's recycled air, and both Zara and Jack laughed. Show off, Zara murmured affectionately. How long until we reach a station? she asked. Another 18 hours to Kepler Junction, Jack replied. It's not much to look at, but they have full medical facilities and can arrange transport back to Verdani space. Your people are sending a diplomatic vessel to meet us there. Zara felt a pang of sadness at the thought of leaving. This human had saved their lives without hesitation, showing kindness that transcended old grudges and political boundaries. In a different universe, maybe they could have been friends. Jack, she said quietly, I know our species have a complicated history, but what you did. I won't forget it. Ever. The rescue pilot smiled, and Zara could see why humans had been such formidable opponents during the war. There was steel beneath that compassionate exterior. Just doing my job, he said. Though I have to admit, this is definitely going in the report as the most interesting rescue of my career. Ember chirped again and settled back down for another nap, apparently deciding that the immediate crisis had passed and it was safe to rest. Zara envied him that simple trust in a secure present. As the horizon continued through space toward Kepler Junction, carrying its unlikely passengers toward safety, none of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would ripple outward, touching lives across multiple star systems and changing the course of interstellar relations forever. Kepler Junction. Kepler Junction was exactly what Jack had promised, not much to look at. The space station hung in the void like a metallic spider, its docking arms extending toward arriving vessels with mechanical precision. But to Zara, still recovering from her brush with death, it looked like the most beautiful sight in the galaxy. Verdani diplomatic vessel Concorde is already docked, Jack announced from the pilot's seat as he guided the horizon through the station's approach corridor. Looks like they're eager to see you. Zara stood behind him in the cramped cockpit, Ember perched on her shoulder like a tiny crimson sentinel. The dragon had made a remarkable recovery during their journey, his scales now gleaming with health and his eyes bright with curiosity about their new surroundings. Will you be staying long? Zara asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Over the past 18 hours, she'd found herself genuinely enjoying Jack's company. He was intelligent, funny in a dry human way, and possessed a steady calm that she found deeply reassuring. Just long enough to refuel and file my report, Jack replied. Then it's back to patrol duty. Never know who else might need help out there. The docking procedure was smooth and efficient, and soon they were walking through the station's corridors toward the diplomatic section. Kepler Junction was a neutral station, jointly operated by several species, and Zara marveled at the diversity around them: humans, Verdani, Arcturus traders, even a few of the crystalline Zephyrians she'd only seen in textbooks. Ambassador Valzac was waiting for them in the diplomatic lounge, his ancient face creased with relief when he saw Zara alive and well. The old Verdani rose from his seat and embraced her warmly, careful not to disturb Ember on her shoulder. My dear child, he said, his voice thick with emotion. When we received the distress signal, then lost contact entirely, we feared the worst. We very nearly experienced the worst, Zara replied, glancing at Jack. If Captain Reynolds hadn't found us when he did. Valzac turned to Jack and performed the formal Verdani bow of deep respect, a gesture that clearly surprised the human pilot. Captain Reynolds, the ambassador said formally, the Verdani people are in your debt. Young Zara here is not just any cultural preservationist, she's the most talented researcher of her generation. The knowledge she carries about our ancient history is irreplaceable. Jack looked uncomfortable with the praise, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I was just doing my job, Ambassador. Anyone would have done the same. Would they? Valzac asked pointedly. Tell me, Captain, how many human vessels do you suppose passed through that sector in the weeks before you arrived? How many Verdani ships chose the safer routes rather than risk the asteroid belt? Jack had no answer for that, and Zara could see he was beginning to understand the ambassador's point. His rescue hadn't been inevitable. It had been a choice, made by someone who put compassion above politics. The Cultural Ministry would like to offer you a formal commendation, Valzac continued. And perhaps more tangible thanks as well. I understand rescue work doesn't pay particularly well. That's not necessary, Jack said quickly. Really? Ember chose that moment to glide down from Zara's shoulder and land on Jack's arm, perching there as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The little dragon chirped softly and nuzzled against Jack's hand, clearly remembering who had saved his life. I think Ember disagrees, Zara said with a smile. Dragons have excellent memories for kindness. For the next hour, they sat in a diplomatic lounge sharing stories and getting to know each other better. Valzac regaled them with tales of the old days before the war, when Verdani and human explorers had sometimes worked together mapping the outer systems. Jack described some of his more interesting rescues, including the time he'd pulled a Zephyrian merchant out of a collapsing gas giant's atmosphere. But all too soon, it was time to part ways. The Concorde is ready for departure, Valzac announced reluctantly. We need to get you home for medical evaluation, my dear. And I'm sure Captain Reynolds has duties to attend to. They stood awkwardly in the corridor outside the docking bay, none of them quite sure how to say goodbye. Ember solved the problem by flying from Zara's shoulder to Jack's, then back again, as if trying to keep them together. He likes you, Zara said softly. Dragons are very particular about people. I like him too, Jack replied, reaching out to stroke the dragon's head one last time. Take care of each other out there. Jack, Zara said impulsively, if you're ever in Verdani space, officially or otherwise, look me up. I work out of the Cultural Ministry on Verdani Prime. I owe you dinner at least. Jack smiled, and Zara was struck again by how that simple expression transformed his weathered face. I might just take you up on that. They shook hands, a human gesture that Zara had learned during her xenocultural studies, and then she followed Ambassador Valzac toward the Verdani ship. At the airlock, she turned back one last time to see Jack watching them leave, hands in his pockets, looking oddly lonely in the busy corridor. As the Concorde undocked and began its journey toward Verdani space, Zara pressed her face to the viewport and watched Kepler Junction dwindle behind them. Somewhere on that station, Jack Reynolds was probably filing his report, reducing their encounter to dry facts and statistics. But Zara knew that what had happened in the frozen depths of the Proxima belt was more than just a rescue. It was proof that the galaxy's future might be brighter than its past, if people were brave enough to reach across old divides and help each other when it mattered most. Hearts across the stars. 6 months after the rescue, Jack Reynolds found himself doing something he'd never expected, standing in the ornate reception hall of the Verdani Cultural Ministry on Verdani Prime, wearing his dress uniform and trying not to feel intimidated by the elegant alien architecture surrounding him. The invitation had arrived through official diplomatic channels, but the personal note attached bore Zara's distinctive handwriting, "You promised me dinner. I'm collecting. Bring your appetite and your sense of adventure." The ceremony was unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. Verdani culture was steeped in ritual and symbolism, and today's event was particularly significant. He watched from the audience as Zara received the highest honor her people could bestow on a cultural preservationist, recognition for her work recovering artifacts from the lost colony of Kepler's Haven, a mission she completed just weeks after recovering from her ordeal in the asteroid belt. Ember sat proudly on a specially designed perch beside the stage, his scales gleaming under the ceremonial lights. The little dragon had grown noticeably in the months since the rescue, though he was still small by dragon standards. When Zara's name was called, Ember let out a small trumpet of flame that drew appreciative murmurs from the assembled crowd. After the ceremony, Jack found himself swept up in a reception unlike anything the Earth Diplomatic Corps had prepared him for. Verdani hospitality was warm and overwhelming, with dignitary after dignitary approaching to thank him personally for saving their treasure of the archives. Overwhelmed yet? Zara appeared beside him, resplendent in formal robes that complemented her emerald skin beautifully. Ember rode on her shoulder, chittering happily at the sight of Jack. Getting there, Jack admitted. Your people really know how to throw a party. Wait until you see the dinner spread, Zara laughed. Though I should warn you, some of our traditional foods can be challenging for human palates. She led him away from the crowd to a quieter terrace overlooking the capital city. Verdani Prime was as beautiful as Jack had imagined, crystal spires reaching toward a sky painted in shades of purple and gold by the planet's twin suns. Gardens cascaded down the mountainsides in carefully cultivated displays that were part art, part ecosystem. "It's beautiful," Jack said sincerely. "It's home," Zara replied, but there was something wistful in her voice. "Though I spend so little time here anymore. The Cultural Ministry has been sending me on recovery missions throughout the sector. Apparently, surviving the Proxima belt has given me a reputation for being resourceful under pressure." "Are you complaining?" "Not at all. I love the work. It's just—" She paused, watching Ember glide between the terrace columns in lazy circles. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to stay in one place long enough to really get to know it. To get to know the people." Jack understood that feeling all too well. 23 years of rescue work had taken him to every corner of known space, but he'd never really belonged anywhere except in the cockpit of his ship. "The Cultural Ministry offered me a permanent position," Jack said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. "Liaison for Human-Verdani Archaeological Cooperation. Apparently, they think I have the right temperament for cross-species work." Zara turned to look at him, her large eyes wide with surprise. "Did you accept?" "I told them I'd think about it." Jack gazed out at the alien city, its beauty both familiar and strange. It would mean leaving rescue work. Giving up the horizon. Starting over in a completely different field. But Jack smiled. But it would also mean working with the most talented cultural preservationist of her generation. Someone who thinks dragons make good co-pilots and that dinner invitations should be honored regardless of interstellar politics. Ember chose that moment to land on Jack's shoulder, nuzzling against his neck with obvious affection. The dragon had apparently made his own decision about the conversation. "He's voting yes," Zara observed, her voice soft with emotion. "Smart dragon," Jack replied, reaching up to scratch Ember under the chin. "What about you? Any thoughts on the matter?" Instead of answering immediately, Zara stepped closer, close enough that Jack could see the silver flecks in her green eyes and smell the faint floral scent that seemed to be natural to her species. "6 months ago, you saved my life in the depths of space," she said quietly. "Tonight, I think you might be saving it again, in a completely different way." The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as they both realized they'd been moving toward this moment since the first time they'd looked into each other's eyes in that frozen cabin. Ember chirped approvingly and settled himself more comfortably on Jack's shoulder, apparently deciding that this new development met with his approval. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So," Zara said, her voice slightly breathless, "should I tell Ambassador Valzac you'll be accepting the position?" "You can tell him I'll be accepting more than that," Jack replied, pulling her close again. "If you'll have me." As the twin suns set over Verdani Prime, painting the sky in brilliant shades of crimson and gold, Jack Reynolds realized that sometimes the most important rescues weren't the ones you planned for. Sometimes they were the moments when two hearts found each other across the vast emptiness of space and decided to build something beautiful together. Ember purred contentedly on Jack's shoulder, warm and safe and surrounded by the two people who loved him most. The little dragon had survived poachers, freezing death, and the lonely depths of space to find his family. Now that family was complete. In the years that followed, their story would become legend, the human pilot and the Verdani preservationist who proved that love could bridge any gap between species, that compassion was the strongest force in the galaxy, and that sometimes the best adventures began with a simple decision to help a stranger in need. Their work together would take them to dozens of worlds, recovering lost artifacts and building new understanding between their peoples. They would face dangers and wonders in equal measure, always together, always supported by their faithful dragon companion who had brought them together in the first place. But that night, standing on the terrace under alien stars, they were simply Jack and Zara and Ember, a family forged in the cold depths of space and tempered by the warmth of the heart. The end.